All right, thank you all for coming to this presentation entitled My Experiences in Finance During the Great Recession of 2007-2008. My name is Andrew Sanders. This is for my Learning Technologies class, and I have some handouts for you. So here we go. Got some handouts, and then I've also got some paper as well if you want to take any notes for questions that we'll have at the end. So here's that. So I'm going to take a pen. So what we're going to talk about today, this is just kind of a brief overview, is the Great Recession. The Great Recession affected many of us, and this presentation specifically is going to be about my experiences with the Great Recession. And so we'll be talking a lot about the financial crisis of 2008, specifically my experiences as a bank teller during that time. I worked with Washington Mutual, which later was known as WAMU, that was later purchased by Chase. And so after we wrap all that up, we'll enter into a question stage. So first off, to kick off the presentation, who can tell me the difference between a recession and a depression? Anybody?
So a recession would be 2 quarters of decline in gross domestic product, and depression would be really a significant, like a depreciation type of event where it's widespread and it causes generally symptoms that are like high unemployment and lost productivity. So for an extended period of time, maybe lost productivity.
Okay. So that's a great definition. So for all of us, we all lived through the recession, the Great Recession, 2007, 2008, and it affected us. It's still affecting us today, 7 years later. And thankfully, none of us personally experienced the Great Depression, but there was a lot of similarities. And so the Great Recession was the second worst economic time in the last century. The economic analysis, it's kind of a downer, so we're gonna move on from there. But the financial crisis of 2007-2008 was also known as the mortgage crisis or the subprime loan crisis. They wanted to ask Farron a personal question. Did you experience any of the fear, any of the issues surrounding that financial crisis or subprime crisis?
We did. We were actually, I was employed at the time, but unfortunately had a change of employment, had to sell a home in Phoenix in order to take employment here in Dallas. As a result, it wasn't a good experience at all. One, because the value of the homes were not what we had been led to believe that they were, which means I was basically mortgaged for more than what the home was worth. So as a result, it made it extremely difficult to sell that home.
Okay. Does anyone else have any thoughts or comments about that new?
Yeah. I just remember trying to buy a home pre-crisis, and you had to go and participate in lotteries, and there might be 3 lots for sale, but 100 people there. And your ticket was putting a check in the hat, and then post-crisis they were talking about bulldozing these homes because nobody would want them. It was just such a stark contrast between pre and post.
Yeah, it was a crazy time to live in. There was another situation that kind of came to light in the news as a scandal. It was called robo-signing. There was a lot of banks that were so set on getting new homeowners into homes that they weren't even looking through a lot of the contracts and documentation that they had. They had basically computerized signatures that took over and were funding hundreds of thousands of dollar transactions, and so it ended up being just a huge mess that ended up leading to the crisis. So the crisis itself has been debated extensively. There's actually a great documentary that's called Inequality for All that really goes into the parallels between the Great Recession and the Great Depression. And I would encourage anyone interested in more learning about that to go look that up. It's called Inequality for All. It was by the U.S. Labor Secretary, Robert Reich. But he goes into extensive analysis of really what caused those changes. But you might be wondering at this point, how does this relate to me? What was my experience, since that's where really we're headed with it? Well, at the time, I was working for Washington Mutual. Washington Mutual had gone through a series of changes. They wanted to rebrand themselves at one point in time and went from Washington Mutual to WAMU. They wanted to be known as the People's Bank. They had completely changed up the way that banking was done. And they did this in an attempt to have more deposits, to have more creditors, to just expand business as usual. The trouble was it tended to backfire. It didn't really expand business lines. For me as an individual, I was just a few years out of high school. I didn't really think a lot about the economy. I was more worried on a micro scale, what was affecting me. I had a personal checking account with Washington Mutual. I appreciated their customer service, and I needed a job, so I went in and went to go to go work for them. And so the problem that really happened with Washington Mutual happened in September of 2008. As you can see here, there was a bank run with all of these fears with the subprime mortgage crisis. From September 15th through September 24th, 2008, $16.7 billion was removed out of the banking system, specifically out of Washington Mutual. Now the problem is that so much of our economy is built on perception, that if we believe the system is stable, it can be a self-fulfilling prophecy, that because we believe it's stable, it in effect is stable. But it creates kind of a domino effect when someone starts to withdraw money because they think that the system is shaky. If you think to yourself, let's say all three of you had accounts at Washington Mutual, and Mark, if out of nowhere you thought, I don't know if my money's safe there anymore, even though it's FDIC insured and had all these other regulations in place to prevent anything like the Great Depression happening again, you go and remove your money. Well, because your money has been taken out of the bank, the bank is less solvent. They have less money that they can loan out to others. Well, because it's now less stable, because you thought it was less stable, that might cause Farron, you to think, well, I want to go take my money out, and then Stacy, you don't want to leave your money in as well. And then all of a sudden there's this trickle effect, and when $16 billion is pulled out of the bank, all of a sudden that's loans they can't give out. That's money they can't work with. And it caused a huge expansion in speculation. So the problem here was that the additional cash outflow led the Office of Thrift Supervision to close the bank. They basically kind of jumped the gun, as it were, and they just thought, they're going downhill, we need to jump in and save them. And so they were sold to JP Morgan Chase for pennies on the dollar. But here, I want to show a graph of basically what was going on with Washington Mutual. So here, if you can see it on the camera, is 2007 shows that we were doing okay as a company, but as the mortgage crisis started to go down, there was just this fallout that started to fall out. Now, where all do you think I was when I got hired? Right here. This is 2008, January 1st. This was actually when I got hired by Washington Mutual. Could not have been at a worse time, in my opinion, because, like I said before, I had no idea of the economy, where we were, or anything like that. But because of when I got hired on, there was a lot of fear that were in place. And so, as a bank teller, I began in January 2008. Some of my basic responsibilities were like any other teller. I would take deposits, withdrawals, make mortgage payments. I didn't think too much about the stability of the system. I would just, I was like a worker bee. I would just do my job and go home at the end of the night and not think much about it. So the drastic rebranding to WAMU happened just at the beginning of when I started working there. I just kind of went with the flow, you could say. So Washington Mutual the crashing at Washington Mutual was personally devastating for me. Not because I, in effect, lost a lot of money, but because I had to do the transactions for others who were afraid of losing that money, if that makes sense. I dealt with people who would come into the bank and would withdraw, $50,000 in cash. And we got to a point where during that week where they did that bank run, I remember that I had to refill my cash drawer. We had personal drawers with money in them. I had to refill like 5 or 6 times that day, which was just unheard of because we were running out of money. I mean, we literally got to a point where we almost said our branch has no money, and when it caused a lot of fear and paranoia. So Mark, you at the time, you were working at Compass Bank as customer service rep as well, right?
Yep.
What was your experience at that time with the changes that were taking place?
Yeah, I mean, it was similar, a lot of concern, and I think it was just more people not knowing what banks were having trouble meeting their cash and which ones weren't. And so, yeah, you're right. I mean, there were people saying, I don't need this money, but I just want to make sure it's still there, and having to try to reassure them that their money's insured, from the government, but they were even concerned about, FDIC.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it was certainly a scary time.
Yeah, definitely.
I can't speak, obviously, from the side that you two could speak on. I can tell you, just because of age, having lost earlier in the crash of the late 80s, what money I had invested in, and when the stock market crashed, we lost all that. So for years, I refused to even invest 401 or anything because I just didn't trust anybody. But as that all started falling apart, I was one of the ones that went to the bank and said, I need to pull my money out. I'm not going to go through this again.
Right.
And at the same time, then I sought out some professional advice of what to do with my 401 because so many people were already starting to lose that as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so individually, it was recommended I take all the money that I had and put in a money market account and freeze that basic, which is what I did.
Okay.
And other people that I know, both in the job that I had and the job that I came to in 2008, just continually talked about the money that they lost as a result of that,
Okay.
of what was going on in the industry. So.
Yeah, the industry changed quite a bit, and even now in 2014, we have so many new regulations that are in place to prevent anything like that happening again. One of the things that shocked me the most was here as a company, Washington Mutual, we were financially bleeding. We had a new CEO that was brought in place, and named Alan Fishman. He was only in position, in the CEO position for 17 days, okay? So he was brought in, he was supposed to be like the savior of the company, was going to help us out quite a lot. Really, he just came in to facilitate the handover to Chase. And in that 17 days, he received a $19 million severance, and that's in addition to his already sizable sign-on bonus as well. That is every bit as much what we call a golden parachute as you could have. Has anyone here ever heard the term golden parachute before? So you could imagine if a plane is going down in flames, jumping out with your the only parachute on board, and you've got this golden parachute because you're really the only person that's making it out well. Everyone else is going down with the plane. So Chase bought Washington Mutual for 1.8 cents on the dollar from what they were worth versus how much Chase actually paid for. It was a massive rebranding project, and the customer base was very unhappy, and so everything just kind of went sideways at that point. There was several stories that I can share that there was customers that were coming in that really appeared to be doing well financially. There's people coming in, they would drop their keys on the counter, and you'd see like a BMW and a Lexus and whatever, and then I would look in their account and they're literally moving $5 out of this account into this one and $2 out of this account to this one just to be able to buy lunch. And so there was another experience that I had with a woman. She was from the mall. You could tell she worked at the food court. She came in wearing this Steak Escape uniform, and she was Hispanic. She didn't speak English very well, But when I went to go make her deposit, I looked and she had $250,000 cash because she was the owner of that franchise. I can tell you that working at the bank, your perceptions of people and their net worth and everything about them is completely different. It's just a matter of people are not always who they appear to be. Your perceptions of who is valuable and who is not really begin to change. Stacy, have you ever had any experience like that where people aren't exactly financially who they appear to be?
Not yet in my short life, no. I haven't.
Okay. Well,
I have.
have you?
Have you?
All right. Well,
So I grew up in California, and specifically a place in Orange County, and I really was really bugged by the fact that everybody was fake it till you make it, and they had big houses, big boats, and fancy cars, and they were broke.
right.
And that's part of the reason why I like Texas and I moved here is because you meet people who live in the same home they have for 30 years, and they drive older cars, and yet they have no debt, and they have a lot of cash in the bank, and they live modest means. And so yeah, certainly it depends on what people are looking for, but those perceptions, if you're an outsider, you might say, oh, these people in California are high rollers. Well, some of them might be, but most of them aren't, just rollers of debt.
So that's a lot of great comments, and so my experience at the bank were ultimately very good, but there were so many things that had changed so quickly. I'm glad I wasn't there for very long. So does anyone else have any concluding questions that I can answer for you?
Did you get a golden parachute when you left, James?
No, unfortunately, no, I did not. When I left supposedly after the recession ended, but
Shoot.
I'm doing better now. So thank you all for coming. This was a great experience for me. Hopefully you got a lot out of it, and we'll keep talking about this.